I married Mark believing he was the man who'd finally bring peace into my life. After years of failed relationships and emotional dead ends, he seemed like a second chance. Mature, successful, and kind on the surface, everything I thought I needed. Our wedding was small but meaningful. I remember standing beside him, feeling certain, even hopeful. That hope stayed with me for the first few months, even when cracks began to show. I met his son, Ethan, shortly after the wedding. 24, polite and a little reserved, he didn't talk much at first. But he always greeted me with a quiet smile. I assumed he was still adjusting. Who wouldn't be? I was the new woman in his father's life, and I didn't want to intrude or force a connection. Still, I hoped we'd get along. As the weeks passed, I noticed Ethan had a calmness about him. He'd linger in the kitchen while I cooked, offer help carrying groceries, fix things without being asked. Nothing grand, just small gestures. At first, I thought he was just being kind, but it started standing out, especially as Mark became less present. Mark was always busy. Meetings, work trips, calls he had to take in the other room. I told myself this was normal. He was successful. Of course, he'd have demands. But there were dinners he missed, conversations he tuned out of, little things he forgot. On my birthday, he was in another city. He sent a generic message and flowers that someone else clearly picked out. Ethan, on the other hand, made a homemade card and baked a cake. It wasn't romantic. It was thoughtful. But it stung that someone who wasn't my husband remembered me that way. I didn't say anything to Mark. What was there to say? That I felt invisible? That the man who promised to love me now looked at me like I was background noise? I didn't want to start sounding needy. So I stayed silent and focused on the house, the garden, my routine. Ethan would sometimes join me while I watered the plants. We talked about books, music. He even recommended an album that reminded me of who I used to be before I settled for being someone's afterthought. It wasn't just that Ethan noticed things. It was that he listened. Fully. When I spoke, I didn't feel like I was talking into a void. And while I knew it was innocent, I started looking forward to our conversations. I caught myself smiling when I heard the front door and realized it was him. I tried to keep things simple in my mind. I told myself this was just a friendship, an unusual one, but still just that. But deep down, I felt the shift. I was emotionally adrift, and instead of my husband being my anchor, it was his son showing me warmth I hadn't realized I'd been missing. And I couldn't ignore it anymore. Mark's absence became more obvious with time. He wasn't just busy, he was detached. Meals were eaten in silence. Eye contact became rare, and conversations felt rehearsed, like he was checking boxes. I tried to bring it up once, gently, asking if something was wrong. He smiled, said everything was fine, then returned to answering emails. I didn't push. I already knew the answer. One evening, I was in the kitchen, hands deep in soapy water, when Ethan asked if I was okay. I brushed it off with a smile, but he didn't move. He leaned against the counter, watching me. Then he said, "You don't have to pretend with me." That hit something I hadn't admitted even to myself. I was pretending, every day, trying to hold up the image of a happy wife when I felt like a stranger in my own marriage. I sat down, exhausted. For the first time, I told someone the truth. I told Ethan how lonely I felt, how invisible. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer shallow comfort. He listened. Really listened. When I paused, he just said, "You deserve better than that." It was a simple sentence, but no one had said anything like that to me in a long time. After that, something shifted. Our conversations grew longer, more honest. We talked about everything, childhood memories, dreams, regrets. He told me about his mother, how hard her absence hit him, and how he'd always felt a little out of place around his father. I realized we shared that feeling being around Mark but not really seen by him. One afternoon, we sat outside while it rained. We weren't talking, just existing in the same space. I looked over and caught Ethan watching me. He didn't look away. There was no guilt or nervousness in his eyes, just quiet understanding. That moment stayed with me. It wasn't romantic, but it wasn't nothing. The confusion crept in slowly. I began questioning myself. Was I imagining things? Was I projecting emotional needs onto someone who was just being kind? But then, why did my heart race when I heard his voice? Why did I find myself caring what he thought, what he noticed? These weren't feelings I planned or wanted. They just were. I started to feel guilty. Not because anything happened, because nothing had. But I knew there was a line, and I was standing right at the edge of it. I never intended for my marriage to feel this empty, or for someone else to fill the space Mark had left. I didn't ask for it. And yet, here I was, emotionally closer to my stepson than to the man I married. I avoided Ethan for a few days, hoping space would clear my head. But all it did was make me feel more isolated. I wasn't just confused, I was heartbroken. And I wasn't even sure who had broken my heart anymore. I couldn't keep pretending. The tension between what my marriage looked like and what it truly was had become unbearable. I decided I needed clarity, or at least a conversation with Mark that didn't end in silence or excuses. I went looking for him that weekend while he was supposedly working in his home office. That's when I saw the message. His laptop was open, screen still glowing, and there it was, a long thread of messages with a woman named Tessa. It wasn't just professional. It wasn't even subtle. There were jokes, late-night photos, inside references. Emotional intimacy laid bare in digital form. I didn't cry. I didn't feel rage. I felt cold. The same cold I'd felt for months, but now it had a name and a face. He hadn't just neglected me. He'd chosen someone else to connect with while leaving me in the shadows. The irony was sharp. I'd spent weeks feeling ashamed of my emotional closeness with Ethan, thinking I was somehow betraying Mark, while he'd been betraying me outright. It wasn't physical infidelity that hurt the most. It was how willingly he gave pieces of himself to another woman while offering me scraps. That night, I sat in the dark replaying everything. Every dismissal, every forgotten gesture, every time he didn't look at me while I spoke. It all made sense. I wasn't crazy or overthinking. I was being pushed out quietly. And Ethan had stepped into the void, not with intention but with care. Honest human care I'd been starved of. The next morning, Ethan asked if I was okay. My voice came out before I could control it. I told him I knew about his father. He didn't look surprised, just sad. He asked if I was going to confront him. I said no, not yet. I needed time. That's when Ethan said something I wasn't prepared for. I didn't plan this, but I think I'm in love with you. The air left my lungs. He wasn't dramatic. He wasn't pleading. It was calm, steady, like he needed me to know it, even if nothing came from it. I stared at him, searching for anger or blame in myself, but all I felt was the weight of too many unspoken truths. I told him I couldn't respond to that.
Not now.
Maybe not ever. But I didn't hate him. I didn't even feel scandalized. I felt seen. For the first time in years, someone looked at me and truly saw me. I left the house that afternoon. No plan, no destination. I just drove until the city lights faded and the silence filled the car. I needed space, not from Ethan, not just from Mark, but from everything. I had spent so long trying to hold together a life that wasn't real anymore. Now I needed to figure out who I was outside of both of them. When I came back, the house felt smaller, quieter. Mark asked where I'd been, but there was no urgency in his voice, no real concern. I told him I knew about Tessa.
He didn't deny it.
He didn't even look surprised. He said something about how things had changed between us, how he didn't know how to fix it. I listened, but I didn't respond. I'd already moved past the part where his explanations mattered. I told him I was done. There wasn't a fight, just a quiet agreement that whatever we had, it was over. We both knew it. Ethan wasn't home when I ended things with Mark. Maybe that was for the best. I packed a few things and moved into a small rental across town. It was the first time in years I had my own space, my own silence. The kind that wasn't lonely, just still. I spent days sorting through emotions like old clothes. What to keep, what to throw away. I thought about Ethan often, but I didn't reach out. I didn't want to blur lines again. I needed to heal without tying myself to someone else, even someone who'd show me more kindness than I was used to. Weeks passed. Then months. Slowly, I started to feel more like myself. I joined a book club, started painting again, walked without needing a destination. One afternoon, I got a letter. It was from Ethan. Handwritten, simple. He said he hoped I was doing well, that he was working through his own thoughts, trying to grow without rushing into anything. He said he still thought about me, but understood I needed space. There was no pressure, no asking for anything. Just words from someone who meant what he said. I didn't write back. Not because I didn't care, but because I wanted my next words, whatever they were, to come from a place of peace, not confusion. I still didn't know what would happen between us. Maybe nothing. Maybe something far down the line. But I knew now that love doesn't always arrive in the right shape, and sometimes what we mistake for betrayal is just the painful truth breaking through an illusion. One evening, I sat down and wrote a letter, not to Ethan, not to Mark, but to myself. I wrote about everything I had ignored, everything I had settled for, everything I had rediscovered. I promised myself I wouldn't shrink again for anyone's comfort, that I would not confuse attention with affection or consistency with love. I ended it with a reminder I would read often. I was never too much. I was just with someone who gave too little. This story doesn't end in romance. It ends in clarity. And sometimes, that's a better kind of love than the one we spend our lives chasing.